Today, we're diving into a really cool, kind of counterintuitive idea in machine learning, that when you're faced with just a mountain of complex data, the answer isn't always more information. Sometimes, it's just about finding that one, single, perfect way to look at it.
I mean, let's be real. We are practically swimming in high-dimensional data these days, everything from image processing to genomics. And the big challenge is always finding the meaningful groups, the clusters inside all that noise. It sounds basic, but as the data gets more and more complex, our old-school methods just start to break down.
And that leads us to the core question that a team of researchers decided to tackle. What if the key isn't buried in the data itself? What if it's all about finding a completely different, maybe even radical, new way of looking at it?
Okay, so before we can really appreciate the solution they came up with, we have to get a handle on the problem. It's something data scientists have a pretty dramatic name for, the curse of dimensionality.
Okay, imagine you're high up in the nosebleed seats of a giant stadium, and you're trying to spot different groups of friends hanging out. When the stadium's mostly empty, no problem, right? But now, start adding thousands and thousands of people, each one a new dimension of data. Pretty soon, everyone just blends into one big, chaotic mess. From your angle, it's impossible to tell who's with whom. That, right there, is the curse of dimensionality.
Yeah, in this crazy high-dimensional maze, everything you think you know about distance and closeness just goes right out the window. You could have two data points that are actually part of the exact same group, but they look miles apart, all because you're just looking at them from a bad angle.
Now, there's a pretty common way people try to find their way out of this maze. But, as this paper shows, that common sense approach can be, well, a total trap.
So the intuitive fix, the thing pretty much everyone tries first, is to just simplify the view. Methods like principal component analysis, or PCA, they try to find the viewpoint that shows the most action, the most variation in the data. It's like trying to find the widest possible camera shot of that stadium, just hoping the groups will somehow pop out.
But, and this is a huge but, what if the view with all the action is actually the wrong one? This example, taken right from the paper, is absolutely mind-blowing. The second dimension, the one with tons of variation that PCA would tell you to look at, is completely useless for finding the groups. But then look at the 15th dimension. A standard approach would have thrown this out, and yet it perfectly, cleanly separates the clusters. It just goes to show you the most obvious view can be the most misleading.
Okay, so if we can't trust the most obvious view, how in the world do we find the right one? Well, the paper's solution is brilliant. You just change the goal completely.
The author's strategy is really a two-for-one deal. First, forget about capturing all the noise and variance. Instead, you find a view that pushes the different groups as far away from each other as possible. And second, at the same time, you find a view that makes each individual group as tight and compact as it can be.
And this slide just nails the difference. PCA is that wide-angle shot of the stadium, trying to capture all the chaos. The paper's approach, which is inspired by something called Fisher's discriminant analysis, is more like a telephoto lens. It completely ignores the noise inside the crowds and zooms right in on the gaps between them, focusing only on what makes them different.
This very special viewpoint gets a name, a discriminative subspace. You can think of it as a custom-built window into your data. It's not designed to show you everything. It's designed for one job and one job only, to make those hidden clusters pop out as clearly as possible.
So that brings us to the real star of the show, the paper's main invention. It's an algorithm they call the Bayesian Fisher EM, or BFEM. And it's designed to find this perfect angle all on its own, even if we have no idea where the clusters are when we start.
So how does it work? It's actually this really elegant dance. The algorithm starts out by making a rough guess about where the groups might be. Then, based on that guess, it calculates the best possible viewpoint to separate them. Now, from that new, clearer viewpoint, it updates its guess about where the groups are. And it just goes back and forth, refining the view, then refining the groups, until everything locks into place and the picture is crystal clear.
Now, that Bayesian part of the name, that's kind of the secret sauce here. In simple terms, it just means the algorithm is smarter about uncertainty. Instead of locking onto one answer too early, it considers a whole range of possibilities. And that makes it way more stable and robust, so it doesn't get fooled by noisy data or get stuck on a bad initial guess.
Okay, so the theory sounds amazing, right? It's super elegant. But does it actually work in practice? Well, the researchers put BFEM head-to-head against a bunch of other state-of-the-art methods to find out.
And the results are, well, they're pretty dramatic. This chart shows what happens as you crank up the number of dimensions, basically as you make the problem harder and harder. You can see the accuracy of other leading methods just falls off a cliff. But the BFEM algorithm, its performance stays nearly perfect. It's just incredibly resistant to that curse of dimensionality.
But what about a messy real-world problem? The researchers took their algorithm and applied it to a super difficult task: image denoising. The idea here is you take an image and you break it down into tons of tiny little patches of pixels. If you can figure out how to group the similar patches together, you can average them out and cancel out all the random noise. It's a huge, high-dimensional clustering problem.
And honestly, the results here speak for themselves. On the left, the image from the other method is still pretty blurry. It struggled to group the pixels correctly. But the BFEM result on the right, just look at that. It is remarkably clear. Because it found a better viewpoint to group all those little image patches, it actually restored fine details in the cobblestones and the bricks. Just amazing.
So let's zoom out. Why does all this matter? Well, this research gives us a tool that really shines exactly where older methods fail, in the super noisy, high-dimensional chaos of modern data. It means more accurate analysis. It unlocks all sorts of practical applications, from medical imaging to just understanding our data better. But ultimately, it's just a powerful reminder that sometimes the smartest thing to do isn't to get more data, but to simply change your perspective.
And that really leaves us with one final thought. This work was all about finding one very specific discriminatory viewpoint to solve one kind of problem. It really makes you wonder, by designing other new and clever ways to look at our data, what other seemingly impossible problems are out there just waiting for the right perspective to come along and solve them?
This is for entertainment purposes only.